Senator, great to have you. This is a full takeover. I think Bill Maher is right. What are your thoughts?
Prisons are set up in our society. I would argue that they do not work. They do not make us safer. The instinct is to just take that person, the source of that harm, the source of that issue, and then just throw them away. Put them in.
Yeah, I don't understand. Like, I mean, I know what they're trying to say. They're trying to say that he believes that prisons should be abolished, but it's pretty basic. It's pretty basic stuff. He's just saying that prisons do not actually rehabilitate people and reintegrate them into society. They're just a way to like discard some of the most underserved, underprivileged people.
Put them in a cage and throw away the key. That doesn't address the reason why that harm was created in the first place. A lot of times, people who create trauma for others are those who themselves went through trauma earlier in their own lives.
Right.
And I bring all of this up to say that, again, like when we talk about policing, I don't think the system actually makes us safer. I think what it does is it just removes problems out of view.
I mean, he's right, 100%. But once again, being right doesn't matter. If the overwhelming majority position on shit is wrong, then being right doesn't matter. The best you can do is try to reframe the conversation in a way that people will be more open-minded to your position. A lot of left advocates forget, which is that just because you are correct doesn't mean other people will reflect on your words. That's why one must always remember the educational journey that they went through. For some, it's not as big as a swing as going from right to socialism. Okay, maybe some were liberals and then they found themselves in the throes of socialist literature. But for many others, this is, once again, something that they've been aggressively propagandized against. So you have to do your very best to reframe the language in a way that is more appropriate for people to accept. That's it.
Look, I think the Democrat Party has lost their minds. I got to say, I was amused listening to AOC say, we're not crazy, we're sane. It reminded me of an old friend of mine who talked about what she called bimbo eruptions, which is whenever anyone says, I am not a bimbo, what does everyone think? You're a bimbo. When Richard Nixon said, I am not a crook, all of America said, you know what? He's a crook. In this instance, when AOC stands up and says, we are not crazy, the rest of America says, you're crazy. And methinks she doth protest too much.
Yeah, just like when Ted Cruz says, I'm not a racist, everybody knows you definitely are. I am not the Zodiac killer. Everybody's like, okay, well, that's what the Zodiac killer would say. There is a little bit of a truth in what Ted Cruz is saying here. It's not wrong. When you do find yourself on the defense, when you do find yourself defending ridiculous slanders and smears, people end up, I mean, you offer legitimacy to it. But of course, no one is ever going to ask Ted Cruz, especially on Fox News, how that works with Donald Trump running around being like, I'm not racist. I'm not a dictator.
Look at Comrade Mamdani, and that's how I call him, as Comrade Mamdani. It is amazing to see New Yorkers vote for someone who is an open communist. He's not a socialist. He's a communist. He's talking about government seizing the means of production. He's talking about massive tax increases and putting the government in charge of the economy.
By the way, I mean, I fucking wish. I mean, how could he do that in the New York mayoral race? I don't know, but could you imagine? Oh, centrally planned economy in the United States of America, a robust industrial base, reshoring initiatives, good wages, more worker control, more autonomy in the workplace, all under the directive of a Democratic Party.
This is dangerous. And I got to say, Sean, there are some Republicans who are saying, OK, good. Let them elect a communist in New York. That's going to help Republicans across the country. I got to say I'm not in that camp. New York is an incredibly important American scene. It is the center of finance in America. It is the center of much of media in America. And having one of the most important American cities controlled by a whacked out leftist. And by the way, the whole party has now lined up behind this commie justice. And so I am hoping there is some reservoir of common sense in New York that says, let's not go that far. You're right. New Jersey is encouraging. I think we can win the gubernatorial race in New Jersey. And I think Virginia, look, Virginia.
Yeah, if these guys were so stoked about Zohran's electoral victory and what it means for the future of the Democratic Party, if the Democratic Party was forced to reckon with the left populist flank and run more leftist candidates, and how that would have down-ticket consequences for the National Party, a negative down-ticket consequence for the National Party, then they wouldn't be crying about Zohran this hard. They would be excited. They would literally say, oh, Zohran's going to be great. Love it. You know, they would say, oh, we don't like any Democrat, but if they chose Zohran, they chose Zohran, right? Except Donald Trump literally wants Andrew Cuomo to win the New York mayoral race, okay? Donald Trump has actively tried to throw hurdles in the direction of the New York mayoral race, claiming if Zohran wins, he's going to cut funds to New York. Like, that is insane. Obviously, if they truly weren't worried and if they were excited at the prospect of Zohran becoming a face of the Democratic Party, they wouldn't be going this crazy against them.
And I got to say, I believe in a reservoir of common sense in our country.
His father's quoted in the New York Post as saying that Nazis took their cues from the United States, history of genocide, ethnic cleansing, official racism and concentration camps. Linda Sarsour, you know, that radical. You mentioned this imam that he's friends with.
Yeah, Linda Sarsour is another key figure here that they're talking about. They're trying to get Zohran to sister soldier like all of these people, myself included. Ironically enough, they can't, like, it's not really working that much, but they're referencing this clip about his dad, for the record. If you actually listen to what he says, you can find every detail here on Wikipedia. None of this is controversial among people who've read books. If you want to describe it as the root of all evil, that's on you. Mahmoud Mamdani here is only laying out facts, not judgment. This is a crisis of critical thinking. That's what's going on here, where we look to people whose primary function is educating the masses, people who are infinitely better read than the average person, talking about something that they know a million times more about. And we just go, how dare you say this? Because the overwhelming majority of people now do not give a fuck about historical facts at all, and instead think about their own personal feelings. There is significant motion in these kinds of counter narratives being launched against the candidate whose father is an academic. Genuine question, logs, please. Is it most of Americans uneducated? My genuine question, and I hope I'm wrong. Wouldn't all these attacks be effective against Zohran and make him lose the election? No. So far, this has been ineffective, or at least has had limited effect. If Zohran also wasn't Zohran Mamdani, a brown Muslim guy, and instead was a white boy whose white father was in academia, this wouldn't work at all. This is not just a war against the truth. It's Republicans have successfully, and Americans by and large, it's not just Republicans, but like American elites have successfully waged war against critical thinking, and they've won. They've won. How do you deal with the false narratives that Republicans lean into? How do you deal with the largest swaths of American society putting their own personal feelings and what they've maybe half heard or half remembered from their shitty education? How do you put that against people who are invested in the truth? I don't know the answer to it, but I'm not going to stop.
He's offering pretty much everything for free, condemning billionaires as people that shouldn't exist, and pledging to confiscate wealth and raise taxes on everybody, and everything's going to be free. This is going to be a case study. Maher's right, and it's going to have great implications because he will not be able to fulfill those promises. The Obamacare promises never fulfilled. Social Security is going bankrupt. Government schools in most blue states and cities are crap. They failed miserably. Defund, dismantle, no bail, reimagine has failed miserably. Open borders has failed miserably. So
I would say we need a new app where the algo isn't abusive to the truth, not abandoning it, but competing against it. Brother, who? With whose money? On whose servers? Who's making this happen? Oh my God, this is where the blue sky truthers come out. Jesus Christ.
America's going to get to judge this. I think it may be a good thing in a weird way. Thought on that?
Yeah, look, what you just said there, that Bill Maher is right, that's something I don't say all that often, although I got to say I'm saying it more and more often because Maher is an old school liberal who actually believes in things like free speech, who doesn't want to see the Democrat Party become a communist party. And I think America is better when you have two parties that are somewhere reasonably near the middle and you can have disagreements. I don't think it's good for America when one of the two parties is absolutely nuts. You mentioned Comrade Mamdani's father. I played on my podcast, Verdict with Ted Cruz, today's entire.
So you see no value and we're going to make X irrelevant?
Podcast is on Mamdani and laying out his radical record. His father also said that Abraham Lincoln was the model for Adolf Hitler. Now, I want you to stop and think, how much do you hate America if you say that Adolf Hitler modeled his behavior after Abraham Lincoln? That is who Comrade Mamdani suckled after. And I'm just hoping, New Yorkers, we don't want to see an enormously important city run by someone who hates America, who blames, who thinks Lincoln and Adolf Hitler are comparable. I'm just praying that there's a moment of pulling back and saying, this doesn't make any sense, because the alternative is really bad for our country.
Let me ask you, J.D. Vance, the vice president, slammed Mamdani for making his auntie the real victim of 9/11.
Yeah.
I never saw him cry over the people that died that day or their families.
Brother, he was 9 years old. He was 9 years old. He was 9 years old on 9/11 in New York. If your attitude is that everyone in New York suffered on 9/11, then Zohran is a part of everyone. The problem is, when these guys cynically say everyone suffered on 9/11, they don't mean everyone suffered on a 9/11. They don't think that Muslims are a part of the in-group, okay? Even a 9-year-old Muslim boy.
Not a word.
20 seconds.
Not a word.
Don't understand it. Why wouldn't you want him to win so that you can say the entire Democratic Party is like this?